Here's the rewritten version. Story 3. A disturbing bus encounter. This took place during the summer of 2009. I had just ended a hasty marriage and was trying to rediscover myself. Eager for a change of scenery, I reached out to 2 of my older siblings in New York City and told them I was coming for a visit. They were thrilled, and since I only had to cover my bus ticket, which was affordable at the time, I booked the trip without hesitation. Excited, I stuffed my suitcase with all my favorite summer outfits, jewelry, and makeup, barely managing to zip it shut. At the station, everything went smoothly. I got my ticket, waited for my departure, and boarded without issue. We made a few stops before reaching the transfer station in Philadelphia. That's when things took a strange turn. As passengers switched buses, I noticed a man with long, unkempt brown hair, thick glasses, and a wild beard. He wasn't unkempt. In fact, he smelled like cologne and seemed well-groomed. But something about him gave off unsettling vibes, like a creepy lumberjack with sinister intentions. I always prefer the window seat when traveling, and sure enough, he sat right beside me. At first, his conversation seemed harmless. He talked about attending his sister's wedding in Philly and heading back to New York. I nodded politely, not much of a talker myself. Then, without warning, he leaned in and whispered, "I'm going to kiss you now." Before I could react, his lips were on mine, his scratchy beard scraping my face. I screamed and punched his arm as hard as I could. Instead of backing off, he burst into maniacal laughter, declaring that he loved me and I was the one. I had never seen this man before in my life. Just as I stood to alert the driver, a woman a few rows behind rushed over, apologizing and explaining he was her cousin with a mental disability. She offered to switch seats, and I quickly agreed. The rest of the ride was unnerving. His laughter grew louder and more unsettling. At the next stop, I passed their seats and saw them making out, whispering and giggling. Whether they were truly related or not, the whole situation was bizarre. When I finally arrived in New York, my brother was waiting at the station. I ran into his arms, visibly shaken. He asked what was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. To this day, I avoid buses whenever possible. The memory still sends chills down my spine. Story 2. A childhood close call. I was 9 years old when this happened. I left school early to attend my 7-year-old brother's dance performance, traveling with him, his friend Sally, and Sally's mom and aunt. My brother and Sally, both dark-skinned, looked like siblings, while I stood out with my pale complexion. People often stared when we were together. On the bus, I sat alone in my school uniform, a gray skirt, white shirt, and a red jumper tied around my waist. My lunchbox occupied the seat beside me until a man boarded midway through the trip. He was the textbook definition of a creep: overweight, unwashed, wearing baggy, dirty clothes with scruffy facial hair. Ignoring the empty seats, he hovered over the one next to me. Oblivious at the time, I moved my lunchbox, assuming he needed the spot. He sat uncomfortably close, his gaze fixed on me, too shy to speak up. I endured it, until after 10 minutes, his demeanor shifted. He glanced around furtively before reaching toward my leg. Before he could touch me, Sally's mom smacked him over the head with her umbrella. "Stop looking at her legs, you dirty pig!" He bolted so fast I barely saw him move. The rest of the ride passed without incident, but as we exited, he gave me a sinister smile and a wink. I saw him on that same bus every day for the next year, until he vanished without explanation. Years later, while browsing local news, I stumbled upon his mugshot. The article revealed he'd been arrested for possessing child pornography and confessed to raping a 5-year-old girl. A Story 1. A narrow escape. This happened to my mother in the early 1970s, when she was in middle school, living outside town. She relied on the school bus. She had a boyfriend who rode the same bus, and though they only held hands, the driver took an unsettling interest in them, making inappropriate comments about their relationship. On the last day of school, the driver skipped her stop. When she tried to exit at the next house, he forced her to stay seated, At every subsequent stop, she attempted to leave, but he refused, leaving her the last passenger, terrified and in tears. As he diverted the bus down a remote dirt road, she planned to escape through the emergency exit. But before she could, she spotted her father and brother following in their truck. She shouted at the driver, "Stop the bus! That's my dad behind us!" The driver halted and opened the doors, but she was too frightened to move. Her father stormed aboard, shielding her as she fled to the truck. Though he didn't physically confront the driver, his rage was palpable. Later, she learned other students had alerted their parents, who then called her family. The bus company fired the driver, but no police report was filed, likely because her father had threatened him. Years later, my mother discovered the man had been imprisoned for impregnating his 14-year-old stepdaughter. Looking back, reporting him sooner might have prevented further harm, but at least he eventually faced justice. Final thought. These stories are a stark reminder that danger can lurk in the most ordinary places. Trusting your instincts and speaking up can make all the difference. Stay aware, stay safe. Here's the continuation of the rewritten text. A mother's harrowing ordeal. Years after the bus incident, my mother rarely spoke about what happened that day. The trauma lingered, a shadow she carried silently. It wasn't until she confided in her mother-in-law years later that another chilling detail emerged. During a casual conversation, her mother-in-law mentioned a distant cousin's husband, a man from my mother's hometown, who was serving time in prison. The reason? He had impregnated his 14-year-old stepdaughter. What made my mother's blood run cold was the added detail. He used to drive a school bus in your district. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The man who had terrorized her as a child, the one her father had threatened, was the same predator who later preyed on another innocent girl. The guilt of not reporting him sooner weighed heavily on her. I've often wondered why my grandparents didn't take it further, why they didn't involve the police. Maybe it was the era, a time when people handled things quietly. Maybe it was fear of retaliation. Or perhaps my grandfather's threats were enough to ensure the driver disappeared from their lives. Whatever the reason, the man eventually faced justice. Just not for what he did to my mother. Just for my life of these stories share a common thread. The unsettling reality that danger often hides in plain sight. A crowded bus, a routine commute, a trusted authority figure. None of these are places we expect to feel unsafe. Yet, as these experiences show, predators operate where they're least suspected. What stands out is the instinct that something was off in each situation. That gut feeling, the prickle of unease, is something we're taught to ignore, especially as women. Don't be rude. Don't overreact. But these stories prove that listening to that instinct can be life-saving. Would things have turned out differently if my mother had screamed sooner? If I'd refused to let that stranger sit beside me? If Sally's mom hadn't intervened? We'll never know. But each of these moments underscores the importance of trusting yourself, even when it feels uncomfortable. Lessons learned. 1. Trust your instincts. If someone's behavior feels wrong, it probably is. Don't dismiss that feeling. 2. Speak up. Whether it's asking for help, confronting a creep, or reporting an incident, silence only helps the predator. 3. Stay aware. Pay attention to your surroundings, especially in vulnerable situations like public transit. 4. Support others. Like Sally's mom stepping in, bystanders can make all the difference. Final words. Fear isn't irrational. It's often a warning. These stories aren't meant to paralyze with dread, but to remind us that vigilance and courage matter. Not every encounter ends in harm, but when it does, the scars last a lifetime. So the next time you hesitate to move seats or brush off a stranger's odd comment, remember, your safety is worth the awkwardness. And if you ever see someone else in a vulnerable moment, be the person who steps in. You might just change or save a life. Stay safe, stay sharp, and never apologize for protecting yourself. End of passage. These stories remind us that, while we can't control the actions of others, we can choose to trust our instincts, set boundaries, and look out for one another. The world may have its dangers, but it's also full of people who will intervene, protect, and stand up for what's right, like Sally's mom with her umbrella, or a father racing to rescue his daughter. May these accounts serve not as tales of fear, but as reminders of our collective strength. After all, the creeps of the world only win when good people stay silent, stay aware, stay kind, and never doubt that your safety matters above all else. That's where our stories end. But the lesson continues. Wherever you go,